Um, Thank you, RBC. I'm really glad that Ron is here today because RBC kind of plays a corporate leadership role when it comes to the visual arts in Canada. And we worked with RBC forever and ever and ever, especially on the painting competition. And now that Emily Carr is going to have some fancy new digs, created by a former board member at Canadian Art, Don Schmidt, I would more than encourage Emily Carr to start introducing some courses on corporate patronage, and especially on Canadian corporate patronage, because I think, quite frankly, we need an awful lot more of it. And RBC has been a real leader in this, and I think we could enjoy that kind of instruction. Nigel, no offense, but this is the weirdest room. I feel like I'm in the midst of an evolving Thomas Dina installation. It's weird that it's black, because today's talk is meant to be on a much lighter scale of things, because of course, to my mind, it's about the future. And last night when David Balzer gave his really remarkable talk about his book, Curationism, there was lots of parsing of words at the beginning, especially of the word curating. So I feel, I always feel that I need to rise up to David's level. So I'm going to rise up to David's level today by parsing the word opportunity, which is in our title here, Making Opportunity. I have to admit to being really surprised. Like, this is a word I felt I knew its definition of. But I was totally surprised when I actually Googled the definition of opportunity to discover it's a measure of time and not commerce. Of course, that has everything to say with the culture we find ourselves in. But the word opportunity is about time. And it's in that context that really it made its way into the title of this discussion. Last year, we marked a 30th anniversary at Canadian Art. And there's nothing like a lengthy anniversary to make you quickly want to think about the future. And what's so interesting is every art scene in Canada is in the midst of pretty major transitions at the moment. In Toronto, Old Queen Street is dead. For a while it moved further west, but then the real estate values went up and up and up, so it had to go north, and it went to Dundas Street. A few years ago it came up to Bloor Street in the West End, and now it's even further out and further up, close to the rail lands. Rail lands are a repeated kind of pattern for where most art scene development is taking place across the country. In Montreal, Montreal used to be, for an editor at least, the best and quickest place to go in Canada, because he would get off the train and walk a handful of blocks to the Belgo building on St. Catherine Street and basically see every gallery you needed to see in Montreal in a single building. And then you'd walk a block further and you'd go to the Musée d'Art Contemporain. Well, Vancouver, it's been clear for the past decade, first with, Catriona moving up, and then the CAG, of course, taking shape here. Vancouver's been evolving too, and I was totally struck last year when I was here about, and maybe it was because the year before when I had finally, Equinox had once again agreed to host our wrap party. And the space, Andy's space, is just so spectacular. But last year, Monty had moved in and the signage had gone up for the Emily Carr site. And Kathleen, of course, had come to visit us in Toronto a year or two prior to that. And the talk was very much about the developing bag. And Reid, I know well from his time in Toronto at the power plant. And I popped over to North Vancouver and we had a good talk about development plans for Presentation House. And it dawned on me that nothing equals Vancouver when it comes to changing infrastructure. And so that's the panel that I thought we would put together today to to sort of bring all the players together. And the final player on our panel is Brian McBay, and thank God for Michael Turner, who kind of keeps me on a short leash from Vancouver via email. And I was vetting some plans with Michael and talking to him about maybe being on our panel. And he said, no, you don't need me, you need Brian McBay. Besides, I have an Airstream trailer that I'm moving somewhere into the Okanagan this weekend, so I couldn't do it anyway. So sure enough, a little bit of Googling brings me Brian, and it's clear that here's Brian in Chinatown, basically reinventing the model of the artist-run gallery. And in our 30th anniversary issue last fall, I tried to look back at some of the major things that have shaped the Canadian art scene over the past 30 years. And of course, one of them was the dominance in the 1970s and 80s of artist-run culture. And artist-run culture is really the font of everything in the Canadian art scene. Even our major institutions owe their quality and everything else to Canada's amazing artists and the energy they have for putting things together for themselves. But it struck me that with all this changing infrastructure, maybe it was time just to get all the players together and to have them talk about it, not in terms of, Kathleen pointed out to me this morning that Marshall Liederman has a piece in this morning's Globe and Mail. And it's kind of pivotal in a sense that, you know, we have to talk about all these major projects in terms of funding and almost like a sports competition. You know, will you reach that level of funding? What's the deadline? Who's writing letters to who, et cetera, et cetera. When the real conversation is about what kinds of opportunities are being made. Because as we marked our 30th anniversary, we quickly realized that even though everything gets made out of self-interest and self-focus, but when you start to look back and count it up, you realize that everything you've done has been for someone else. And so I'd like this morning's panelists, and I'm hoping the spirit of questions to them from the audience, kind of comes in those terms about what are the opportunities that these new infrastructures are creating for us and laying the groundwork for, and futures, in fact, we don't even have a clue of at the moment. So that's why I've invited you all here. That's why I hope you've come to listen to them. And I used to give 3-hour lectures at Ryerson on contemporary photography. So I'm going to cut it there. I won't. And once again, thank you for coming. And let me see the order. I think it seemed important to recognize our host first. So Nigel's going to start off, and he's going to speak, and then Reid is going to speak after Nigel, and then Andy is going to speak, and then Brian, and then Ron, and then Kathleen. And the only prepared document I have is actually panelist descriptions. So if you bear, why do I think you already know who these people are? And it's a bit beside the point for me to read all these things out. Just let me cut it short and say these are all superstars in not only the Vancouver art scene, but the Canadian art scene. And we are so thankful that they all said yes to come here today. So Nigel, over to you.
I think I always wanted to be a rock star anyway, so I think in many ways what you'll see here is just a revolving series of images of very recent projects that have occurred over the last 4 years or so. And what they will provide is some sort of visual context perhaps for some of the things I'm going to be saying. In many ways, my little talk will be a sort of an amuse-bouche for some of the things that'll be forthcoming from friends on the panel. Unlike others, CAG at the moment is not involved in a major building project, although we hope to be in the future, perhaps. And we'll learn from the good fortunes of friends and colleagues. I've been here just over 4 years. I, in many ways, arrived to Vancouver in a rather sort of lucky situation, whereas thanks to the good work of previous board members, directors, gallery staff, volunteers, etc., there was an incredibly firm foundation on which to build and develop, and what was perceived by the board then as the CAG poised on the precipice of its next stage of development. I arrived 2011, its 40th year anniversary, and while the CAG has a long history of various incarnations going back to 1971, it has only been a public gallery in its current state since 1996. So in that sense, this version of CAG is a relatively young institution. And that's in many ways quite important, because we are a public institution, we're a non-collecting gallery, so we're not a museum, although we are based on a collection. The CAG was in a particular position, locally, nationally, internationally, and it seemed right, perhaps, to try to move it toward a next stage of development. One thing I felt was very important as a public institution is that very word public. How does a public institution demonstrate its relevance to the society in which it is working and operating? How does it somehow embody a sense of civic desire? How does it engage in many, many different ways and create access for this wonderful thing of contemporary visual art? How does it play a role intellectually as a scholarly activity, as a social dynamic, as a fun place to be? How does it remain curious? How does it retain a sense of smart intelligence, but at the same time be accessible? Difficult things, big ideas to grapple with. We have set in motion over the last 4 years a number of different ways to begin to address these issues through exhibitions within the gallery, through projects outside of the gallery, elsewhere in the city, elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in the world. And not just exhibitions, all sorts of other kinds of projects, pop-ups, if you like, such as the project we made with Gareth Moore a few years ago that happened in parks and community centres. We've been lucky to be able to get people who involved who want to support us, people who want to join in, people who want to be part of what we do, who want to be associated with what we do because it's a fun thing to do, because it's something that they feel has the right kind of association, this sense of being smart, but also being accessible. The exhibitions we make in the gallery, in the main now, are partnerships and collaborations with other institutions locally, such as the Bush Festival. Brian and I are talking about things to do something together with 221A as a joint project. We're working with Ballet BC this year. Then nationally, and that might be the Power Plant in Toronto, it might be Mercer Union in Toronto, it might be Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal, it might be Contemporary Calgary, where there's a piece of work that we commission that's currently on show. Or it might be internationally. It might be Frau Kiel-de-France Le Plateau in Paris, it might be Villeray-Arson in Nice, it might be Kunstverein Heidelberg, where we have an exhibition that we originated and presented here at the beginning of 2014, that is just opening in Germany. It might be at Aspen Art Museum, which is coming up later this year. And in all of these places, the CAG, as you know, the CAG dot, our institutional branding, is present. There's the association with Vancouver and the very rich history that Vancouver has within contemporary visual arts. And then, by extension, there's that association with Canada and everything that Canadian contemporary visual arts is about. I think in many ways, as somebody who supported artists from this part of the world when I was working in the UK, I'm sort of doing the same thing, but perhaps in reverse, or from the other end of the periscope, or the other end of the tunnel. What else do? We work outside of these four walls. I think it's important that we are seeing this relatively modestly scaled building is somehow seen as the transmission hub, is seen as the locus from which everything else radiates out. It's important that the institution is seen to be porous in some way, that there's this flow, there's this give and take between arts and audience. The CAG becomes the filter, the membrane that catches this activity in some sort of way. Thinking of these ideas of opportunity that Rick mentioned in his opening remarks. So we make projects outside of these four walls as a part of an outreach. Those of you, I think most people here are from the city, you'll be very aware. Perfect timing. We the Yaletown Roundhouse station. We program a series of events and commissions there, about 2, 3, 4 each year. Becomes a regular activity with the support of the Canada Alliance Public Art Program. We also have been lucky enough to work with the Park Board, and we now have another space, another satellite of activity on the Burrard Marina, a field house, a disused field house on the edge of the park. These are the images that you see just now. That enables us to work with artists on residencies. And a rather sort of beautiful thing I think about that is it actually returns the CAG right the way back to its founding history in 1971, which was not institutionally based, but was about supporting artists in production, in commissioning of work, and the presentation of those works within the city. And this residency aspect of our program enables us to work with artists in a similar way, I think. It enables us to work with artists over longer periods of time. So those who are from elsewhere in Canada, or from here in the city, or elsewhere in the world, who come to Vancouver, they come here on many occasions. The projects unfold over 2-3 year periods over the course of maybe 4 or 5 different visits. And what that enables is for a depth of relationship to emerge, a sort of meaningful relationship. It's not about parachuting some person called an artist into a particular social situation. Hey, wouldn't it be great to be involved in this? And then they parachute back out, and you're left with your head in a whirl, thinking, what was all that about? What does that mean? So the residencies allow us to unfold things over time, the opportunity in time, over a different time scale, a different time frame. It allows dialogue and conversation to emerge. And it allows that meaningful relationship to begin to develop through this sense of a different kind of social engagement with these projects that occur outside of this building, outside of the Burrard Marina building, and happening and immerse themselves into the actual urban fabric of the city. And I suppose it's those kinds of, that range of platforms, those rafts of different opportunities that is the expansion of activities that we have been engaged in over this last 4 years, and the contribution that the Contemporary Art Gallery makes to the broader visual arts of the city. And I think through this myriad of different ways of connectivity enables us to begin to demonstrate that sense of civic importance and that embodiment of civic desire. Thank you.
Thank you much. Nigel, I just have one question for you, as I'll have one question for each of our panelists before we move on. When you find yourself knocking up against the walls, where are the limits to what you do?
I can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Is this on? Can you hear me?
No.
No?
Closer.
Closer? Is that on? Closer? Does that work? No?
Closer.
Maybe I'll just yell louder. Can you hear me there? No? Now it's working. Speak louder. Speak louder. I asked Nigel when he feels he bumps his head up against the wall. Where are the limits in what you do? Does it come every, I don't know what's your fiscal year, but is that when you hit your head up against the wall? When do you know you'd like to go further, but there's something in the way?
I guess that's almost every day.
That was good.
I mean, without being some sort of like imperial charge, you know, it would always be great to have a little bit more money to enable you to do a little bit more and have a little bit more space in which to do it. Physically, this building, when CAG moved from Hamilton Street to here, this was a huge leap in terms of gallery space, storage space, etc., etc. We are sort of busting at the seams now a little. Staff has grown in the last 4 years from 3 to 10, which is quite significant. The type of projects we make, I think, has grown in scope and ambition, and certainly financially it has grown. In May, we are actually converting a storage room that's just sort of behind this wall here into an event space. We've managed to do some successful fundraising, and that will release a certain pressure and give us a degree more flexibility. Financially, we start each year from a minus figure. You know, our operating grants don't cover our operations. So there's an immediate point at which one's head is bumping against the wall. We take that leap of faith in the way that Yves Klein leapt from his window, supposedly. But we do have a very core, loyal series of supporters and advocates in many ways, some of whom are my colleagues on the panel here. That sense of collegiate environment which is present in the city, I think. A lot of the things that are going to be spoken about today about building infrastructure, Vancouver is a young city, and there's all sorts of debates to do with transport, etc., going on in the city at the moment, which is about building infrastructure, of which I think all of us in varying degrees would agree that arts and culture is a major part of that healthy city, of that livability, of that desirability of a city. And while physically we bump our heads against the wall, or financially we bump our heads against the wall, that doesn't stop us continuing with the ambition of what we want to achieve. I say we start each year from a minus position, so there's the sort of situation in which we immediately find ourselves on the 1st of January. And it's at that position, from that position, with an optimism, but not a naivety, that we move forward.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Nigel.
chairs here, there's people standing, there's one here.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
My name's Reid Shier. I'm Director of Presentation House Gallery. I'd like to thank Nigel and the CAG for hosting, and to Rick and everybody at Canadian Art Foundation for organizing this event. I think it's very timely. I'll try and be very brief. I think everybody's curious to hear from the whole panel, and I know there's probably a lot of questions out there. I want to just begin by picking up on one thing that Nigel had mentioned, is a sense of collegiality that exists within Vancouver, which I think is really important to stress right now. Nigel gave a good job of describing how one organization can be a real catalyst for a number of different conversations for artists, both within a city and outside of that city. And I think I would like to sort of stress how important all the different levels of organization, many of which are represented here today, contribute to an ecology in a city. And I think each of us, and a lot more, are really vital to how Vancouver has been able to represent itself to itself, and how it's been able to help support what is a real remarkable artistic scene, certainly within the visual arts, but larger than that. It's a very special and precious thing that exists at any given time, especially when you have the caliber of artists that exist in this city right now. And all of the organizations, in as much as they've been able to support that and show it, I think are very, very important on every level to that ecology. You know, from an artist-run center like Brian, all the way up through the commercial gallery scene to the mid-level galleries, the exhibition-centric exhibition facilities such as the CAG and Presentation House, up to the Vancouver Art Gallery. And beginning at that, of course, are the art schools. And Emily Carr, I'm a graduate of Emily Carr. I ran an artist-run center, and that's how I learned how to do my job. It was on-the-job training. And then I was fortunate enough to be curator here for a little while, and I started to learn a more professional practice. And now I'm directing a gallery, and I've spent the better part of the last decade trying to create the opportunity to build a new institution. I think there is a very strong sense of collegiality in the city, and I think all of the organizations are important as part of that ecology and as important as part of what makes this city special. So I just kind of wanted to stress that at the very beginning. I'll be very brief in my introduction of what I'm trying to do in North Vancouver. I know many of you are familiar with the organization. Many of you have visited us. This is a shot of North Van in the early part of the century, an industrial site, if ever there was one, with the shipbuilding industry. I don't know if we're on a rail yard, but we're certainly, where we're going to be is near to a site of former industry. And that is a very common theme. This is where we are now. It's provided us a great opportunity to make professional exhibitions, much as you can't tell from this shot, but it certainly doesn't impede in my argument about why we need a new building either. This is the site of where we're planning our new facility. It was an old, you're looking at what was the Kate's Tug Shed. There was an early idea to retrofit this shed into the gallery, but that proved unfeasible. So that shed is now gone. And in its place are our plans for this new facility designed by John and Patricia Patkow, who are also designing the O'Day Museum up in Whistler. Many of you will know that. So this is our facility. It's a 22,000 square foot gallery. Two-story design on a transparent ground level podium, largely of retail and entrance, the entrance and retail on the ground floor, with the gallery and a large education and event space on the second floor, which I'll show you an image of in a sec. This is a view from the foot of Lonsdale Avenue out towards Vancouver, looking southwest. the design very purposely kept the ground plane transparent, so those kind of pedestrian views through to Vancouver and to the shore would be unimpeded. And you will see our new name, the Polygon Gallery, which I'm happy to take questions on. We were very lucky to receive a founding gift of $4 million from Michael Adane and his company, the Polygon Homes. It's a gift divided in equal halves, $2 million from Michael and his foundation, $2 million from Polygon. And we offered naming opportunities for that gift and are very happy to be bearing that. And this I will end on is the education and event space. So for lectures such as this, that maybe are not so dark, Rick, we will be able to host a revolving platform of other events. I'm not going to show our exhibition space. We're still tweaking design in there, so I'll keep that as a surprise.
It's beautiful.
I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
You reassembled the mic.
Am I to remain for my question?
I just wonder, Reid, as you move ahead, do you see the mandate of presentation as changing at all? Or will it keep tight to photography? Where do you see that end?
We have no plans to change the mandate. The mandate has never been, it's been more of a guiding principle than it has been a specific mandate. Photography has always been the bulk of what we've shown, but never exclusively. So it's photo media has always been the core of it. Film and video, camera-based practices. I think the mandate has been one that has been very focused, but one has also been very difficult to describe. So there's all sorts of different words that we use in our applications, like camera-based, image-based, photo. None of them really do a proper description of what we're showing. I think conceptually we have a very clear idea of what the gallery is, and it will remain a non-collecting institution and exhibition focused. How that evolves as photography and image culture evolves remains a very open question and one that we will be following.
And what happens to the current site?
Your mic's not on.
The question was what happens to our current site, and I think like all things in Vancouver that will be subject to very eager development plans. We're very good at erasing history and building condominiums.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Sylvester, the owner and director of Equinox Gallery. And I'm just going to give you a brief history of how this space on Great Northern Way came to be. My gallery is 43 years old, started in 1972 on Robson Street, and my predecessor, Elizabeth Nicol, moved because Robson Street was too tough. So in 1972. So in a couple of years to 8th Avenue on the 3rd floor, which they stayed for some time. And in 1987, I helped move the space to South Granville, which was a sort of 80s aesthetic with polished concrete floor on Granville Street, about 6,000 square feet. And it was a terrific experience and lasted for a quarter of a century. But at that time, I started to feel my audience was changing dramatically. And there was a complicated and difficult sometimes relationship to expanding audience. There was a specific moment where I asked a client to come and see an exhibition of Ben Reeves, and he said, oh, I saw it already on his phone. And I thought, this is a problem. I have to think about the relationship of the internet to space, and to my space, and to gallery spaces, and specifically in the commercial world for collectors to think about that nuance. So it encouraged me to start thinking about space in a larger parameter and about opportunities that might come from thinking about a larger context. So in 2011, after a series of conversations, I found a space on Great Northern Way, which will be right next door to Emily Carr University. And I originally wanted it and thought about it as a project space to continue my gallery on South Granville, which was a functioning gallery and a good business, and to have this as a secondary space to do projects and to have the opportunity to do large-scale solo exhibitions that were museum in scale and substance. So we started off with a Fred Herzog retrospective in January of 2012, and then came this enormous surprise. In my gallery, the history of my gallery would be on Granville Street to have 200 or 300 people in a given week. Fred Herzog's exhibition had 6,000 people in a space that was incredibly difficult to find, in a space that we kept getting phone calls all day about how do we get there with no infrastructure, with no anything. We had this enormous audience. And it allowed me to think about the idea of expanding an audience substantially, the idea about engaging in an audience based on a space that would entice you, it would entice the audience, would entice collectors to come and visit us without seeing the exhibition on their phone. And when I talk about audience, I should be clear, representing the private sector. I see a few of my colleagues in the audience. Audience for me is certainly everyone, but our function and the way that we pay our bills is through collectors. So when I speak about audience, I'm really speaking to a certain extent about how I entice collectors. And it functions as a business. So with respect to funding from my other colleagues, my business functions entirely from the sale of art. And I always remember in the art world, it sort of seems like an easy proposition, but there's a wonderful story about if you want to make a small fortune in the art world, it's very easy. You start with a large one. So since I didn't have a large fortune, I thought I should pay attention to audience. This space invigorated me to use this opportunity to expand. And in Vancouver, having this been my city for a long, long time, when I found this 15,000 square foot building, it took a good 10 seconds to say yes, because that option in the real estate world to find a building that you can turn into something like this and afford it happens once in your life. So it was a very quick decision. And we continued with functioning with this space as a project space for a couple of years. And so we not only had a solo exhibition, we had group exhibitions. This was an exhibition curated by Sophie Brodovich called Cut and Paste, which brought together about 30 artists from across the country. And we brought in Paul Butler's collage party table and had a wonderful time where artists would come in and make collages throughout it. We should have had a vodka sponsor for that show, though. Very fast. The next slide. And we also had Chen Zach came in and made a huge collage out of paper mache in the gallery just in advance of the show. So the space as a project space functioned as almost a performative center for the process of art. And again, my audience liked it very much. And then in the summer of 2012, I decided that I sort of put my blinders on with respect to talking to clients and said, I'm moving here full on. I'm moving the gallery from South Granville to Great Northern Way. And we started a massive renovation of this space. And when I talked to the architects, I had three sort of terms that weren't architectural, but I wanted to define the space by. Number one, I wanted it to be generous, inviting, which was very, very important that we can bring in people, and that it's flexible, that we have different areas of the space that we can use for different propositions. And we had also and I had very sort of old school ideas. This part that you're seeing right here is a library, which I had I had a conversation with my architect about saying that you actually don't need a library. I have to say I use it probably every day, so I encourage the new buildings to have very good libraries in them. And the other most important part of the architectural choices was daylight. For me, that's very, very important. And while I don't have to worry about conservation conversations as much as my colleagues in the public sector, I really like the idea that daylight changes the space, and you can go in there on one day and the exhibition looks like something different from the following day. So this is the entrance which we started to make, and I have to say that was a very important understanding of how this space and how audience gets talked to, or how the audience speaks to us, I should say. So we moved the entrance of the gallery to the center of the space, and we gave a very large foyer where you walk into the space. You're not confronted by anyone. You can walk up to the front desk and talk to one of our 5 people, or you can choose to go in either the East or West Gallery. But in Vancouver, I thought that was very important because space in our city is so precious, and I had the opportunity to have this space that was remarkable. So I wanted to use it to allow you to go into the space before you choose your destination, either to engage with us or to go to see the exhibitions. I put this slide in because for all of you people that think working in the art world, working in galleries is an enormously fun and gracious opportunity, this was our office. We stayed open while we renovated. So this was the office for 5 people for 6 months. So every day we'd move the plastic and shake off the drywall and go to work. So from that desk, you go to the next one, we went to this desk, which is a 30 by 8 foot desk made out of pine beetle wood, which all of you in British Columbia knows what that is. So we go to the next one. And that desk was put right where you saw the entrance. So when you come into the gallery, you can engage or not with the people that work there. Then for us, it also gives the opportunity to greet people and have this kind of conversation which extends the ideas that we may have in talking about the art, and it allows for a sort of non-pretentious way to enter a rather intimidating space. And so the space is built with 5 galleries, 2 very large ones which have 16-foot walls and 12-foot walls, and reasonably sophisticated lighting systems where we can control the nuance of the space with daylight. So we have the opportunity to change it as daylight changes. And that's that giant skylight that you saw. We have 2 of those in the East Gallery. And I have a wonderful little office, which in Vancouver is about the size of a condominium. And then we have 3 viewing rooms. So in the commercial world, in my world, it's very important to have space that you can show artists who are not exhibiting. So when you represent artists and a collector from in town or out of town is interested in seeing something, the tradition is to sort of pull it out of a storage room. What we've built are 3 viewing rooms where if someone wants to see something, we can do an installation that speaks to that artist's work, and it allows the collector to go in and view at his or her leisure. And they have a 10-foot ceiling, which also refers to the spaces that people have in the city. And the big spaces have the opportunity for really wonderful openings. And we have a wooden floor that was there because of the film company, and we left it and painted it. So the acoustics of the space are really, really quite terrific. Apparently you have to be blonde to come to our openings. So. We also have, and we're going to continue to do this, we work with guest curators. So Mina Totino, a noted artist in Vancouver, did a terrific painting show to which she gave a talk to last year, and we have all sorts of projects to extend this idea with curators and other galleries here and in the larger world. And the final thing that we did was very personal. We built a kitchen, a very large, almost industrial scale kitchen in the edge of the gallery for 2 reasons. One, because I like to cook, and secondly, because I wanted a space where the conversation and the dialogue with artists and collectors and everybody else could be more casual and more nuanced and in a way less difficult. So we have We have dinner parties at the gallery where we've invited many people in the room to have conversations with artists, with curators, and with collectors in a way that everyone gets to know everyone else in a slightly sympathetic way, and in a way that we hope encourages dialogue. So this is the final space that we came up with, that we finished, and you can't miss the wonderful orange color. There's a funny story. There's no one from Great Northern Way. The people at Great Northern Way wanted a black building, and Monty and I, who's next door, wanted this color. So we went to this meeting, and we were having a conversation, and Roy Arden, who had made this color, made it up, gave it to us and said, why don't you do the building this color? So we showed it to the people, to which there was a little conversation, and I said, you know, so they branded this whole area of the Flats where Ron is going to be moving to, and I said, you know, this is Flats orange. So we phoned Roy Arden up immediately and said, that color you invented is Flats orange. Which he agreed with the next slide. And so that's the gallery, which has worked well for a couple of years, and we hope we have another ways to go with it. The two exhibitions that are on now speak to the way that I hope programming will continue in my gallery, and that is there are two exhibitions. One is a historical show that uses photographs that deal with the storefront. So it's sort of an exhibition about the vitrine, which is quintessentially photographic in that it changes over time, that it has parameters on it which are the sort of brackets of the frame of the camera, and that it talks about the social history of a place and the relationship of that photographer to the place. So it starts with Eugene Atget in 1910 and continues with Fred Herzog and David Wisdom right through, and we also have a very important Walker Evans photograph and a fabulous Lorraine Gilbert picture. The last show, and in the other gallery we have a first show of an artist from California, Martin Elder, who is technologically brilliant and a very interesting artist, and we are delighted to have his exhibition. So I would like to thank our hosts for having us here, and like to thank Canadian Art, and they are indeed having a reception at my gallery tonight, and I invite you all, especially it's their booze. So. Thank you very much.
So, Andy, I hope this mic is working. Yeah, okay. So a three-part question. Has your collecting audience grown to match the scale of the space?
It hasn't grown to match the scale of the space if I consider the scale of Bramble Street compared to here, but it's grown, and I can see the possibility of it increasing substantially. So, especially within the context of Vancouver. So, the international audience is one thing, but the Vancouver audience, I think, has not been able to see a commercial gallery function with this kind of scale. So, it's been a joy to come to work every morning, and I think clients are interested in it too.
So, in that vein, how do you plan on that kind of growth in a collecting audience? I mean, you can plan on growth in an artist's prices once they reach a certain point, but how much does that collecting audience figure into your long-term planning?
That's a question that keeps me up at night. I mean, I plan the storefront exhibition is an exhibition that happens because I collect photographs, for example. I collect all kinds of art. So I would have collected some of those works and said, sometime I'm going to do a show that deals with this idea, and it just evolved. So there are many shows in my pocket, essentially, that I've thought about that will become exhibitions in the future. And some of those shows, from a commercial point of view, aren't the smartest thing to do. But the advantage of this building is that I can do at least 2 exhibitions at the same time and fund that eccentricity, or fund those exhibitions that simply won't pay for themselves by doing other projects which will. So it's an interplay, and it's a challenge, but I think in Vancouver that world is growing immensely. I think the collecting world is growing immensely, and it will grow substantially if our mayor, is this on TV? If our mayor would get on board with some infrastructure.
I was thinking that nobody would bring slides, but I'm the only one without them, so you're going to have to experience me, which is great, I hope. And so my name is Brian McBay. I'm the director of 221A. I guess I thought that today I would speak about one particular thing, because there's very little time, which is a term or an approach that we've started to cultivate at the organization I work with, which we call pre-displacement. And so, I mean, the organization I run, which many of you might not know, but might be visiting today, it was founded in 2005 by a group of students, actually at Emily Carr, and it was really founded in a very particular kind of environment, one that was critical of design and, in particular, thinking of development and investment and the way that design shapes contemporary society. And so, as a group of students, we wanted to see ourselves as artists that were studying and sort of set up this kind of extra academic environment to meet and speak and think about, I guess, disciplinary boundaries. In 2008, I mean, there was a few years of arguing with ourselves. In 2008, we decided to move into a space, and just like many artist-run centers of the past, kind of adopted this model of a storefront kind of studio. So at that point, it was more of a self-promoting kind of collective where you sort of have studios in the back and a kind of small gallery in the front, and the studios sort of pay for the building. Very simple kind of logic. But after a certain amount of time, as you can, there's a number of these spaces still in the city that come and go. Somebody is going to burn out or whatever, somebody has a boyfriend or whatever happens and they go somewhere. For us, we thought, okay, maybe we should try to turn this into a more publicly facing kind of project. And what would that be? And as a group of artists and designers, we really honed in on the particularity of what we were interested in, which is around design, or the role of design in the shaping of society. So we started to think about how do we get funding to make this work. And aside from us simply paying rent and making it happen, kind of very simply, we thought, what can we do? And it was actually 2008, right when we were reading about these banks collapsing in the States. And we were thinking, okay, well, the private sector doesn't really have any money for us. And, there's not really much there. And the public sector is basically telling the public galleries that they should look somewhere else. So we thought, what do we do? And at the same time, if you can believe it, our rent went up. So how did our rent go up at the same time as everything's crashing? So in a way we thought, well, perhaps we should adopt this kind of real estate model and use it in a sense. And so we noticed the building, and we're located in Chinatown, which is very important to this discussion. But we noticed a building across the street. It's for lease. We went in. We decided to take on the head lease for the space and use it as another space for studios. And we thought maybe instead of having this front little gallery, we would have one building, which is kind of like the gallery, and then we'll have another building which pays for that gallery, and we'd sort of subdivide units. And at that time, we developed what has become a buzzword, a social enterprise, which is a sort of model where you generate revenue towards a charitable purpose. And with that, we were sort of gained a lot of, I guess, money and reputation to start gaining access to public funds. So this actually in 2008, so we moved into Chinatown. In 2011, we took over this other building. We started to generate revenue. We started to then get public funding. We realized, okay, there's actually there's a way to make it affordable for artists, and in order to do that, we would look for capital funding from the different funders. And so in 2011, I mean, I'm sure that actually a number of the people on this panel, believe it or not, have hung drywall themselves. Myself and a number of friends, we basically built most of this space ourselves, even though there was some funding involved. And I remember just as we were about to complete the bathroom, I went to the Or Gallery, which is another artist-run center, and they had an exhibition on by architects from UBC, and it was a kind of adjudication or accreditation kind of exhibition where the architecture professors need to show some of the work they're doing. And there was these scale models, 3D printed models, and came across one. It's at Inga Roker, and it was a 3D model of a tower right on top of the building we just renovated. So we're thinking, okay, here we are. We've just like kind of developed this model, and everyone's really excited and signed a 10-year lease on it. But in a sense, we already saw our own death, you know, right there. And so there was in that sense, that kind of prompted us into thinking about spatial politics in an interesting manner. And we thought, okay, well, we're now part of someone else's development timeline. And so where are we in that timeline? And I think time is maybe a good way to speak when you say opportunity. You know, how do we speak to this future? And so a number of the projects we started to do, both in our exhibition room and as also our development sort of projects, have arced towards kind of being critical or resistant towards a larger development kind of paradigm. And so more recently, we managed to connect with a number of the people in the community. I'll just describe one quick project. You might have to stop me at some point because I could go for a long time, but the bathroom in one of our spaces, I ended up inviting a group from Budapest called the Blood Mountain Foundation to renovate our bathroom. And it was the idea that renovation was this kind of important, like deep kind of mode of cultural healing and remembrance, in the sense that the construction industry tends to see it as sort of just too cost inefficient. And so they came here and stayed here for 5 weeks exploring the neighborhood and talking with us and talking with you know, people in the community, and came up with the idea that we don't need a bathroom. What we need here is a shrine, but it still needs to be a bathroom. And actually, we actually had funding to pay for the bathroom, so it had to remain a bathroom. And basically, the idea was to make what we called a pseudo-historical shrine. And we actually ended up calling it the pre-displacement pseudo-historical shrine, or bathroom makeover. And it's basically like a toilet in the middle of a black kind of room. And so you can circumnavigate the toilet rather than, it's not like on the edge of the room. And there's like a fairly severe wall, and it's actually been broken into 2 rooms because they wanted to soften the threshold of entering the bathroom. So there's a little curtain, you go in, the sensor light, the light turns on, and then you go into the shrine where the toilet is, and the light is actually mounted behind you. And so, the artist's idea was, okay, well, you need to contemplate yourself while you're in this room. And basically, what we wanted to do was make such a bizarre circumstance architecturally that when this building is being destroyed in 10 years, the people who are destroying it will have to question why they put this thing in. And so this kind of, I guess, approach, or a kind of more poetic approach to the way that community is developed, and the way that spatial sort of politics are organized, is what we've learned to bring into our practice. I'll just explain one more thing, which is more recently, as a result of getting to know the community quite well. So after that first studio rental project, which was successful, we did another one in 2013 in Chinatown. And then actually, I have a very kind of deep history in Chinatown and was interested in the neighborhood as a space that was, segregated ghetto at some point, and remains sort of in this kind of intensity of development pressure. And we made a lot of friends with people in the neighborhood, including business friends and people interested in a kind of questioning, what is Chinatown going to be, and thinking about it in a more nuanced sense. And one of the building owners had an empty lot. And I liked that. I said, oh, an empty lot that's full of signifiers, it's just an empty lot. And we had mentioned to them, well, perhaps we could use the lot for something. And he said, well, they don't intend on developing this lot for, again, another 10 years. So I said, well, how about this? We'll take the lot and then we'll apply to the provincial government to change the charitable tax, or the tax classification to the charitable level. And that way, you guys will save some money, basically, and we will not have to pay anything. They really liked that idea, which was shocking to us. And then soon after, actually, the city of Vancouver was quite helpful. We became quite close with them after developing all these buildings. And we received a 10-year development permit, and also we set this new precedent of transferring a public art allocation from a neighboring development off-site to this space. And the first project, so this space, it's in Chinatown at Union and Gore, right across from the Viaduct, which is the historic neighborhood of Hogan's Alley. Basically, we saw as this space of pre-displacement, in the sense that we have this kind of cross-section of space to work with for a period of 10 years while the neighborhood's undergoing development. And so our first project we just recently launched. I'm not sure if people have heard of it, but it's a very small Vancouver special by artist Ken Lum. And basically he took the value of, actually took the artwork value, which our production budget was around $50,000 or $45,000 for the work. And he said, well, what could you buy in Vancouver real estate in that neighborhood? And it turned out that the price of a Vancouver special in 1973 was around the same, about $45,000. And it turned out if we were to scale this house based on current land value to the previous, it would be remarkably smaller. So it would be about like the size of a cake, like about this big. And we thought, okay, well, $45,000, like it's a pretty expensive little cake. So, and also Ken was thinking, well, there's a kind of sculptural logic that we need to fulfill. Like, what's the sculptural logic? So we should increase it, even though we've decreased it. So we'll decrease it down to 1973. And then ultimately we decided to increase it by 8 times. So it's now 1/3 of a Vancouver special, because it was 1 to 24. The math's a bit funky, but anyways, basically it's a very small Vancouver special, but it's also an enlargement of the change in value that's happened over the last 30, 40 years. And thinking about the way that normative property value, I guess, alters our everyday experience is part of this project. And so I guess, just to end, I would say that there's, I think, a really exciting kind of poetic opportunity to take advantage of real estate, instead of viewing it as a sort of box to store things, or instead seeing the history of that neighborhood, and recognizing that there's actually a real kind of living experience that's happening in and around it. So thank you for having me.
Sorry, I'm fussing with my microphone here. Have you ever thought about franchising? And I say that facetiously, but it makes me wonder if you've got a troupe in from Budapest,
Right.
Renovating your bathroom. How wide are you networking at this point with what you're doing there? Because it sounds pretty special.
Well, yeah, I mean, locally, there's an emergence of activities happening there. I mean, the building, so we have about 30,000 square feet amongst the different buildings. and there's probably 7 or 8 nonprofit organizations that either have offices or presentation spaces, and then there's 42 artist studios, so there's quite a bit. And now we're working on, there's a new building actually near Clark and Franklin that we've just taken over. It's about 12,000 square feet. And basically we are interested in sort of developing a community, and at the same time considering ways to create our own economy. And I mean, we remain very critical of ourselves. Like, where do we start exacerbating kind of privatization, and where do we draw the line in terms of what we're willing to take on? But in terms of network, I mean, the programming, which is actually what I'm really interested in. Like, all of this is just to get to the programming, in a sense. But I mean, this has become programming too. But it's definitely, I mean, internationally or globally relevant, because this development kind of ideology, mathematization of space, or this kind of assumption that you can, say, okay, we're going to build this kind of condominium and we're going to have an art gallery in the bottom as an offset for some kind of private gain or capital gain, is a kind of old idea of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and as it changes, we have to think about it. And I think globally it's a very relevant kind of concept that's happening. I mean, it's different in different places, obviously. Like if you go to Vienna, where I was recently, art plays a more centralized kind of role. In fact, it's kind of excessive or something. But there is, I think, obviously this connection between something like Dubai and Vancouver in terms of development industries, sort of a decontextualized idea of space. That space can be anywhere, and 1 square foot in the Contemporary Art Gallery is the same as 1 square foot in 221A, but actually they're very different kind of social production.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Those Emily Carr grads, they're everywhere. Thanks, Brian, that was great. So I have no slides because I don't want to talk to you about buildings. I do want to talk about infrastructure, but I want to talk about it in a different, perhaps a more nuanced way. It's a good week. We went through the design panel at the city. They tortured us for 3.5 hours, and we passed, and no one predicted we would pass. So we're now in the stage where we're actually moving quickly towards the March 2017 commissioning date. That building will take somewhere between 18 and 22 months to build. I'm going to move off this quickly. If you know the National Gallery in Ottawa, that's the exact size of the building. So what is not present in the images you've seen, and the reason I don't want to show you images at this point, because we're still tweaking the inside, working with faculty and staff and students, it is massive in scale. It's quite extraordinary to sort of walk, which I did a few months ago, walk through the National Gallery and realize, holy cats, it's 4 stories. It's a similar height, similar width, similar length. But what I really want to talk about is this notion of the core of what we do. It's the 90th anniversary this year of Emily Carr, 1925. And that 90th anniversary will be celebrated in the fall. And the core of what we do, which I think Brian exemplified, is that we try to create a context in which students and people who are seeking some answers to both their identity and their sense of self, try and provide some space in which they can explore who they are, where they're headed, and where they might actually really, really want to go with their lives. We attract the most extraordinary students from around the world, 50+ countries, and the most extraordinary students from around Canada and BC. And these people need a space to live, breathe, and understand what it means to engage in the process of creativity. It's not a process that can be reduced down to a formula and shouldn't. It's not a process that's linear. It's a process that allows people who are exploring their lives to figure out for themselves how they can best express who they are and how they can affect the communities of which they're a part. So that's such a fundamental principle to the way in which we operate that this infrastructure really represents the finest values of that learning experience. It's tough. Every discipline wants a lot of space. Painting really lucked out, I have to tell you. 4th floor, north facing, beautiful studios. But it's hard to conceive of spaces that are flexible, that can change, that can alter as disciplines shift, that can respond to the differing tastes and predilections and proclivities of faculty and staff and students. So one of the guiding principles that we worked with was flexibility, transparency, permeability. How can you actually construct something that people will look at and feel they can actually come into? So one of the most beautiful parts of what will happen on this site is that there will be one 20,000 square foot plaza and one 15,000 square foot plaza. So 2 public spaces for the east side that really will open up for the community, for the population in Vancouver generally, but particularly the communities in Strathcona and Mount Pleasant and Grandview, open up the possibility of actually engaging with the experience of learning about creativity. And I'm being careful and not saying the word art as a provocation to the rest of you. So how do you build something that expresses the core of that innovative desire that young people have to find a place in the world for themselves? The first group of architects I talked to, I said, could you possibly build something that is to architecture what Twitter is to conversation? Provocation. And they all got very nervous. Some sweat when you say things like that. But it was intended as a way of talking about this new space, this new place, this new environment that we now occupy, that we share, which is interfaced by screens and social media and a variety of communication technologies, most of which challenge the notion of physical infrastructure profoundly. So how do you build something that represents the potential of what people need to understand is so crucial to the core of who we are and how we live, while at the same time acknowledging the depth of the change that we're undergoing at the moment, which I consider to be very, very profound. Well, one of the ways that we resolved it internally in trying to figure out the direction of this process was by thinking about a learning commons. One of the biggest spaces in this new building it's about 30,000 square feet, is entirely open and devoted to the library, maker spaces, DIY spaces, places that actually create the informality, get rid of the formality of the classroom, get rid of the formality of schedules, and create the spaces that allow people to imagine things in ways that they hadn't prior to that. The squares represent, the plazas represent that open flow of trying to sort of de-emphasize the physicality of the building. It's such a big building and so massive in scale that my biggest worry has been that its scale will overwhelm its purpose. That it'll overwhelm this real need to have walls that can be torn down. I don't like art schools that are clean, that are not material, where you don't feel the craft pulsing through the walls. This has been a challenge. The budget is small. I mean, 122 million in Vancouver is massive. 122 million for Nigel is ecstasy. But it's small with respect to the number of disciplines and number of students we have. How can you make something that is flexible enough to accommodate Brian, so Brian can come in and colonize pieces of it? Can you actually create corridors that invite people to redo them, remake them? Can every space in what we call a gross to net relationship, so the gross is 285,000, the net is about 30% less of that. How can you make that 285 work so that every square inch is available to everybody at all times? We challenged the architects continuously around this notion of 21st century infrastructure and what it means. And I don't think we've ultimately succeeded in many of these principles. What we've succeeded in doing is creating the baseline potential for the people who will occupy this building to transform it. Because no physical structure, no physical infrastructure is anything other than what the people who live in it do to it. And as long as the quality of students, the quality of faculty, and the quality of staff keeps staying as high as it is, they will work this building over. For example, at the moment, we're engaging with faculty in a discussion about color. The exterior of the building is clad in a material that allows color to change. We're really interested in color. We don't want an abstract expressionist painting to be the building, but we do want the building to be a piece of public art. So how will color actually interact, and what will it mean to the local residents in particular? You know, if it's sharp, if it's bright, if it's aggressive, if it's low, if it's not emphatic. We're into the subtleties of trying to figure out in the interior how to make the galleries, and there are galleries, how to make the galleries really move the process of creativity forward through display, through exhibition. We have this wonderful potential, if we can raise the money for it, to have, and anyone in any kind of performative context would die for it, an auditorium which is essentially a ballroom where all the pieces of the floor in 16 different variations pop up for different configurations of different kinds of expression, from just straight ballroom to proscenium to round to any form you want. But it's all based on these principles of trying to figure out how a space can actually function so people who live in it will feel it in their gut, walk around and say, that says something to me. And it's not just about the way the walls are put in place, and it's not the way the corridors are structured, it's not about individual studios or classrooms or anything like that. It's about the core feeling that an overall structure provides in the deepest sense, and I'll say in the European sense, that when you walk into certain structures in Europe, you know the story, and the story is speaking to you. And so we're desperately trying to take what is a P3 project, and I'm not going to explain P3s to you, but if you ever need a consultant for P3s, I am now the guy. P3s are insane, difficult, challenging. They do not respond to some of the qualities that I'm describing. But so we're struggling with trying to give that breathability to this building. It will stand for a long time, both as an infrastructure, as a symbol, as an expression of the extraordinary history of the institution, but the extraordinary history of artistic expression in Vancouver. And I'll close with a very, and you know, I invite questions. I know there are lots of people have questions about something that's about to happen. It's more exciting than something that may or may not happen. Sorry, I didn't say that. You know, I want to wake you guys up. I'll just close with a comment about how the funding structure affects the capacity to imagine different ways of doing things. And it really does relate to what Brian was saying. For all of us, I think, who have worked on this project, we've tried really, really hard to see it as precisely that, a project. Not as a building, not as the penultimate expression of Emily Carr's extraordinary history and the extraordinary history of creativity in Vancouver and BC, but really as something that expresses the process of creativity within its core and its gut. And you'll notice that. You'll notice a lot of areas in this building that actually beg you to walk into them and really change them. You'll notice a different sense of, and a hope, an open sense, that it's not proprietorial, it's community-based. We want the entire community in the area to feel that they can walk into this building at any time and make use of the facility. And if we don't succeed in providing that openness to the community, we will have failed. Thanks.
Ron, who is your competition? Rupert Murdoch has been talking about privatizing education and in fact is delivering it. online. Where does that fit within your scenario of things?
And we were offered 66.2 million for Emily Carr, third time, by the way. Just as a joke, I get these letters. They're faxes, actually. I don't understand them really. But 10 years ago, 6 years ago, and last year. And all the time, it's always like 62, 64, 66. I can't figure out where they're getting the valuation from. The competition is everywhere. It's in the private sector, where you can go online and learn about animation very quickly and very efficiently. It's in the private sector. Vancouver Film School would be an example of that kind of approach. Art institutes and so on. The difference is that a public institution with a budget of 22 million, which is enormous by the standards of Reid Shier, but which is tiny by the standards of any other school in North America and virtually any other school in Europe, that the engagement that is necessary to survive, being at the edge all the time, we rarely have anything like a surplus. We just finished our budget and we hit $32,000 surplus on a $22 million budget, which means that we're at the edge every day trying to manage expense against revenue. That edge of the public experience, that edge of reaching out, as long as the institution stays true to its course and true to its mission, which is really to be a center for people to learn and to be a center where people feel they can learn, the competition is meaningless. At the end of the day, Animation Mentor, which attracts thousands of students, is a very effective tool for a very limited point of view. I'm fond of saying that the existential crisis that students go through at Emily Carr, and the teachers who teach them are the ones that have to bear it, is actually the most important thing that we contribute to the culture. That crisis is a crisis both of identity and purpose. It's very different when you go into a vocational stream and you have to define yourself quickly according to the discipline that you want to participate in. When you come in and you don't know which discipline is really going to work for you, when you aren't sure exactly what works best, when you aren't sure which part of which material will actually express most deeply and most profoundly what you feel about the world, you spend a lot of time thinking about who you are. And you take courses in history, and you take courses in science, and you take courses that make you understand how to understand the process of perception. You get involved in this mix of things that no particular online course could ever offer. Online courses are 1950s language labs. Are there people that had to suffer through high school and go to those language labs? I did. It's learning at its most now. Yes, tremendous possibilities, fantastic resources available, we do it. But that's not what art schools are about. Art schools are really about discovery, and it amazes me how productive they are. These small, there's only 4 in Canada, there's 360 in Europe. There's 280 in the United States. There's 44 in Australia, there's 4 in Canada. Canada's bereft of this particular existential crisis, which may well explain why we have the politics we have. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's so quiet out there.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I want to hear you. I want to thank the Canadian Art Foundation for the Art Hop. It's a really wonderful addition to the Vancouver art scene. I want to thank Richard for organizing this panel and to compliment you on all of your many successes with Canadian Art Magazine. It's such a vital voice for the dynamic Canadian art scene, so thank you for your work. And I just want to say how happy I am to be here today with such a distinguished group of colleagues, colleagues that I admire greatly, so thank you. As you all know, and it's been touched upon quite a bit this morning and this afternoon, Vancouver is the home of a major contemporary art scene, one that I believe requires an equally major visual arts museum. A museum that will instill pride in its citizens through its powerful and exciting and welcoming architecture, through the legacies that are embedded in its permanent collection, through the stories told in its exhibitions, and through the connections that it will make nationally and internationally, and through the lifelong learning that will occur for its audiences. I'm very proud of the role that the Vancouver Art Gallery plays as a member of our community. I believe that our new building project, that will be one of Canada's and Vancouver's most exciting cultural and urban developments in over a generation, while it has certainly been daunting at times, undertakings like this, if you do something great and you want to realize something wonderful, it takes a lot of time. But I know I speak on behalf of our board and our staff and our many supporters in saying that we are more committed than ever to this project and to the tremendous opportunities that it presents for our city. The project is more than just a building. It's about taking our exhibitions, collections, and public programs to the next level and providing greatly expanded opportunities for artists, visitors, and the larger community. Our planning process goes back to more than a decade, when we did a major master planning study that addressed the serious space and building issues, the deficiencies, many of them, in our current courthouse building, which ultimately led to our decision to find a new site. Early on, the city-owned site at West Georgia and Cambie Streets was deemed the most desirable. Formerly known as Larwell Park, it has such a rich history of public activity, including marches, sporting events, political activities, and fairs. We all felt that it was the ideal location for a new Vancouver Art Gallery, given its capabilities to connect to several dynamic communities, including the downtown, Gastown, Yaletown, Chinatown, and East Vancouver. And as this is the last available city-owned block in downtown Vancouver, we fervently endorse that it remain in the public realm. This ties to the gallery's vision for the new building, to serve as a vital and dynamic gathering place, a town square for the 21st century, a new creative commons. We then searched for the architect who we felt could best deliver on the potential of this very special site. And the gallery was very proud to announce last April that Herzog and de Meuron had been selected to design our new home. Herzog and de Meuron have become internationally recognized for their designs that are both highly inventive and responsive to the site geography and culture of the place in which they are conceived. Their buildings not only effectively and elegantly meet the needs of their users, but are also places that have transformed entire cities, becoming part of their cultural DNA. Think of the Tate Modern's dramatic impact on London. Or consider Miami and the innovative redefinition of public space created by the Perez Art Museum and 1111 Lincoln Road. Another important factor in our decision to work with Herzog and de Meuron was their long-standing engagement with the visual arts, working with institutions, artists, and collectors around the world. Examples of many of their renowned buildings include the Schaulager in Basel, the Goetz Collection in Munich, artist Remy Zaug's studio in Mulhouse, the De Young Museum in San Francisco, and the National Stadium in Beijing, which represents a very unique collaboration with Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. With 20 museum projects completed around the world, we also knew that Herzog and de Meuron could deliver on our desire to address a major shift in how art museums today define their missions, functions, and strategies to engage increasingly diverse audiences. And for the past 8 months, we have been engaged in a very intensive conceptual design and master planning process with the architects. I have to say their research on Vancouver and British Columbia has been most impressive, which has included travels across the province, from Haida Gwaii to Salt Spring Island to the Okanagan. It's really been extraordinary. Throughout the process, it's been a pleasure to involve many of our stakeholders, for we know that creativity fuels community, and community fuels creativity. The new Vancouver Art Gallery will celebrate this place, contributing to a thriving cultural and civic ecology. And I have no doubt that with Herzog and de Meuron at the helm of the design, with a committed board of trustees, and with an engaged public, we will build something truly extraordinary for this city. Our new building, which will be approximately 300,000 square feet, will double the current size of our current building. And there are several artistic initiatives, of course, that we have in mind. I'm just going to talk about a few of them right now. We want to amplify the impressive depth and range of our collection, representing the most comprehensive resource of visual art in Western Canada. This will include dedicated spaces for our permanent collection, which will be equal to all of our exhibition space at the current building. And some of those galleries will be free all the time to the public. To measure the artistic pulse of Vancouver by presenting the work of emerging and established artists in a new light, and more actively engaging with the leading international art scene. To excite the learning in everyone, encouraging all ages to think outside the box through school, family, and adult programs in a new education center. To create adaptive platforms that will serve artists using new technologies as part of our constant exploration of visual culture. To give live art a new home through a theater space for a new performative and film program, while expanding opportunities to partner with local organizations such as our existing relationships with the Push Festival, Media Lab, and Music on Main, just to name a few. And to provide a physical space for the Institute of Asian Art, which we launched last October. While these are just a few examples, it is equally significant that this building provide the city with vital new civic spaces that will enliven the precinct that includes the Queen Elizabeth Theatre and its front plaza, the CBC, the Vancouver Public Library, BC Place and Rogers Arena, and Vancouver Community College. 2 weeks ago, we opened the exhibition titled Material Future, the architecture of Herzog and de Meuron and the Vancouver Art Gallery, providing our members and visitors with an opportunity to consider Herzog and de Meuron's design philosophy and to take a closer look at many of their key buildings. And just as importantly, to reflect on the 84-year history of the gallery and the trajectory for our future. As part of this exhibition, we are presenting a series of talks and programs to engage issues of urbanism, urban design, and the transformative role of art, as well as the museum's role in the public sphere. And as part of that, I'm thrilled that Jacques Herzog will be coming to Vancouver on May 6th for a public lecture at the Orpheum Theatre. In conclusion, while having worked on this project for a very long time, I remain extraordinarily passionate about the opportunity for the new gallery to fundamentally change our ability to cultivate, develop, and disseminate ideas about art. Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum, and I'm constantly inspired and buoyed by the extraordinary work of my colleagues in Vancouver's dynamic cultural community. I think together our goal is to provide the citizens of Vancouver and all who visit with an amazing experience of art that is unique in the world and can only happen here. Thank you very much.
Kathleen, I'm still spinning
Richard.
on this story that you directed my attention to this morning in the Globe and Mail. And I take it there are some difficulties in terms of timing and funding. But to an outsider,
Yes.
this seems in many respects unbelievable, because if there's a clear anchor for growth in the visual arts, then it would be in a new Vancouver art gallery that would drive growth in all your colleagues sitting here at the table. So it seems sort of unbelievable that it would not be so obvious what a good investment is. Given the amount of time you've put into this
Yes.
and effort, how surprised are you that it's proving so difficult?
You know, I have to say, I don't think I mean, all these projects are always difficult. You know, we've been at it for 10 years. By the time we open the gallery, we'll be at it for another 7 years. I just think that, you know, we just have to keep pushing on. I think that, you know, we know there's a desire by many people in this community, artists, supporters meaning not only our individual donors, but the broader community to make this happen. And I think we just, you know, keep kind of a focused vision, and I think that's why we've gotten to where we are today. I mean, the institution has grown substantially in the last decade. When I came to the gallery, our budget was $6 million. Now it's $17 million. Our private sector support has, you know, grown probably by 400 or 500% in that time. We have a membership base of 35,000 members, when at one point it was 5,000. So I think that really speaks to the support of the institution, and you know, we just keep our eyes on the prize, and we keep focused. And you know, there's always challenges when you're dealing with governments, and you know, you just, you know,
But
that's just part of it.
But it speaks to a certain gap between the visual arts and popular culture. Assume that the politicians and the public funders are part and parcel of that popular culture, but I suspect they may be part of their own culture that is not quite
Yeah,
popular.
I'm not sure it's really about popular culture, really. I think that, you know, governments these days have tremendous challenges. You know, and I think we're always sensitive to that, and I think we have been through this process, and, you know, I think we'll continue to be sensitive to it, but I think we'll continue to kind of keep driving ahead and keep letting people know how important this institution is, how important it is not only to Vancouver, but to the rest of Canada. I mean, we have such tremendous support in other parts of this country that look to our programs, that support us financially. You know, we send exhibitions of artists from Vancouver around the world. You can't replace that with other institutions, and so we'll keep charging ahead, and I think we'll be successful. I feel very confident.
Okay, thank you very much. Whoops, as per usual, it's 1:22. I'm sure there are some questions, so let's at least take a couple. If not, I hope, yes, there's one at the back.
It's maybe a question for the dealers, but for everyone. When will we be able to sustain a proper art fair in Vancouver?
Andy?
There's so much benefit in other cities. I mean, Toronto's got a terrific, but how come Vancouver? When's that going to happen?
I hope it doesn't.
Thank you.
Art fairs are one permutation of a kind of populist tourism, and they're very, very hard to work at a level that's interesting. So to drive them beyond being a mid-level commodity-driven experience is exceptionally difficult, and it's very competitive around the world. And in a city of a couple of million people that's very young, that has not yet built its cultural infrastructure, we should not be asking for that. We should be asking for a way to increase the cultural infrastructure in the city so that we have internal conversations about understanding, buying, and being interested in art.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it at that. And I hope there's a battalion of bikes and cars and cabs outside because the tours are starting in only a couple of minutes. But by all means, come and join us at Equinox at 5:30 this afternoon, and maybe we can carry on this conversation in person. Thank you.